Afternoon all, let's carry on the Evolution of Style series with game 21 of that first encounter match in the World Championship match between Alexander Alekhine and Efim Bogoljubov. So, okay, it kicked off with D4 and we saw a Nimzo-Indian Defence, so Nimzo-Indian system started to be used. And this match, basically this match actually then provided a spotlight for the use of the Nimzo-Indian here. So bishop b4. But it seems queen b3 was a very popular move. The modern move is queen c2, well, Kasparov's favourite move. There's also e3, which is like the Rubinstein variation, very popular. But queen c2, very popular. Queen b3 has some similar properties, though, to queen c2. So in a way, we can see the evolution to modern opening theory. But more fundamentally, in the middle game here, there's something very interesting going on, which I'd like to highlight, about the exploitation of an isolated queen's pawn. Black tries to play very energetically and generate quick counterplay, trying to liberate this bishop, not minding structure so much, as we see very shortly. First c5 is played, and d takes c5, capturing away from the centre. Okay, it's rule breaking in a way, capturing away from the centre, but white wants to make use of that semi-open d file pressure. Black recaptures on c5, and then we see knight f3. So black has the choice. Does he just want to castle and maybe later suffer a bit, knight c6, and try and maybe fianchetto this bishop? Because he might be suffering on the d file, maybe d6 is exploitable for pressure anyway. But no, he doesn't. He tries to avoid suffering. He goes for an isolated queen's pawn here by playing a quick d5. So Alexander takes on d5, and after bishop g5, okay, both black's bishops are active now. So the expense of that is the isolated queen's pawn. Can pressure be brought to bear on d5? And if so, how? Okay, so immediately actually, of course, bishop g5 pinning the knight is putting indirect pressure on d5, threatening actually bishop takes f6 and then something taking on d5. Bishop e6 is played here. White doesn't really want to try and win a pawn. Queen b5 check is not so effectual here. Knight bd7. Taking the pawn is just greedy on b7. So actually Alexander he takes on f6, but not taking the pawn here. He just puts more pressure on it by castling also on the queen side. Whoops, castling queen side. So we've just had bishop takes f6, g takes f6, castle queen side. So he's got 3 pieces now on d5. Okay, knight d7 is played, and now actually the isolated queen's pawn. It seems as though it's just being intuitively blockaded by this next move, knight d4. Just the basic blockading principle, like Nimzo-Indian's system: restrain, blockade, and destroy, which is basically the element of a major targeting system. That if you were going to target anything, you'd want a fixed target basically. So restrain, blockade is creating a fixed target, then you destroy. So the basic premise of a targeting system, or when you're doing archery, is better to have a fixed target. Maybe even if you can stun the target. So that military analogy here. But is it so simple? Does white really want to exploit d5 here and not just blockade it? Okay, we have a very interesting mechanism, which is sort of Karpovian. In Karpov-Kasparov matches in later years, the exploitation of an isolated pawn actually paradoxically was basically unisolating it to create a more exploitable weakness. That method has proven value when you look at the specific variations, the specifics. So actually white is going to unisolate the pawn very shortly, but first it is restrained. And I guess you could say unisolating the pawn in order to destroy it is still part of that process, restrain, blockade, destroy. So we've got the d5 classic weakness. So is it instructive how Alekhine destroys it? So rook c8. First he reduces a bit of black counterplay. He plays king b1. Okay, so black has a few issues here. The structure is ugly looking, okay, but you know, is it all bad? Knight e5, and it looks as though potentially black might generate some counterplay if white's not careful with knight c4 and stuff like that, and maybe even, given the kings here, maybe even later try and generate some attack. So here is where we get a demonstration of how to exploit the isolated queen's pawn, which is sometimes to unisolate it. Knight takes e6. So I think, and this method was used later by Karpov, much later, you know, after the 70s, you know, against Kasparov. You unisolate the pawn as part of the destroy part of restrain, blockade, destroy, because now what's happened here? Okay, we've got still 3 pawn islands. You could argue that black structure isn't so stable. Without that light square bishop, d5 is also, it's still being targeted by quite a few of the white pieces here. But is it in imminent danger? Well, we have the potential also to undermine the chain at the base and under the Nimzo-Indian principle, potentially with f4, f5. f4 immediately would allow knight g4, so I think that's why this next move was played, bishop e2. It's commonly got this threat of undermining with tempo, basically, f4, f5. d5 will be undermined. So this is part of the destroy part, restrain, blockade, destroy, of the isolated queen's pawn. We're witnessing a positional demonstration here. The king actually gets off the diagonal because also, I believe here there might actually also have been, or will be, a tactical threat of knight takes d5. In fact, if we engine check this position, does knight d5 exist tactically on this diagonal in any case? Apparently it's not coming up. Knight takes d5. There might be a refutation here, a simple move. Refutation, yes, queen b6. So there's no discovered check at the moment. Is that really the case also after bishop e2? Okay, say we give black a token move like a6. Is that knight takes d5 on the cards? No, again, it seems as though the resource here, I think, will be queen b6. So for the moment, knight d5 was never a tactical target, but black anyway is wary also of e4, exploiting that diagonal after bishop e2. So I think that explains partly his next move. He just gets the king off the diagonal, but he is allowing this tempo gain, tempo using, undermining of his pawn chain now after f4. Because once you get in f5, d5 is going to collapse. And okay, so knight c6, f5. You might think, well, black's gaining the e3 pawn here, but his centre's going. After bishop takes e3, his centre's disappearing. F takes e6, he plays d4, and now d5 is also a very useful square, knight d5. There's no easy way, I think, to deflect the queen away from the protection of the pawn, of the knight, with knight a5. This might be worth checking, though. If black had played knight a5, possibly just e7, and if takes, well, actually we'll still end up with an attack. So what would be the refutation of knight a5, just for interest here? Oh, e7 takes, we take, and in this position knight takes e3, carrying on forcing sequence, just to end up a piece up. So knight d5 is now threatening, actually, knight takes e3, using the pin on the new isolated queen's pawn. So queen e8 played, okay, and the bishop's taken, and queen takes e3. So white has gained a significant advantage. Structurally, there's a fracturing of black's pawn structure, still 3 pawn islands, with f6 being slightly weak, but it also means h7 is more of an exploitable target than usual, actually, because there's no g pawn. And there's an interesting tactic coming up very shortly, which demonstrates the problems with h7. For the moment, though, after knight e5, black has shielded the pawns, so it's threatening to take on e6. So Alexander plays queen h3, not only defending the pawn, but remember it's eyeing h7 as well. So rook c6 is now played, which seems to be going into a skewer, but there's an important check available to black in this position anyway, queen g6, if black needs it. So after bishop b5, this queen g6 check is used. Now the rook moves. Okay, and now bishop d7 carries with it actually a threat of e7 and e8 kind of winning the exchange. So rook d8 guards against that, because now e7, d7 can be taken. Alexander plays rook c1, getting off a pair of rooks. Queen g5 hitting the rook on c1, the rook moves, and again there's a big threat potentially of e7 now. So knight c6 defending against e7. Now Alexander takes some time for his king safety. He just plays a calm move a3. He's got an important extra pawn. It looks like a one game without too many issues. Queen e5 centralizing the queen looks like a good idea intuitively. Maybe it also kind of means e7's are stopped. Queen f3 again, it also strikes across the central squares, and not only that, actually d5 is very important here, and there's a big tactical improvement which could have been made here. After rook b8, Alexander played a seemingly strong move, little queen shift. He played queen f2, which not only keeps an eye on the vulnerable f6 pawn, but now threatens bishop c6 and maybe, you know, queen takes a7. And you can imagine the damage that could do, you know, queen f7 and e7 and rook d8. But actually in this position there's a very strong move which invites check, which would have shifted attention actually to h7, and I'll just add the Qb4 for that. And this move is actually rook d5, and I found it kind of interesting because it echoes the previous decisive game in the match where the queen could have been shifted away from f6. So you can imagine the check here, the king moves. Okay, and now f6 is being attacked, so say black defends it with rook f8, not too many moves. Now white could here shift the attention to h7, and it will be quite crushing actually. There's immediately very big threats here, like queen f5. So say knight e7 to stop queen f5. There's still queen d3, say f5, queen h3, and h7 is just dropping here. So this would have been, you know, really just absolutely crushing this kind of continuation, just with this rook d5. And I find that interesting that sometimes Alexander, maybe a little bit of complacency kicks in and he loses a bit of precision. So if the most precise move with the benefit of modern engines seems to be rook d5, but queen f2 is also a good move, like second highest like rating I think given by engine checking. Okay, so knight e7, he's still increasing his advantage, trying to deflect the queen again away from f6. Queen hangs on to f6 with queen g5, but alas, a7 is dropping, so the advantage is still increasing. Queen d4, still tying the black queen to defending that poor f6 pawn. Rook g6, now g3. So we've basically, with white, Alekhine has garnered another pawn. So he's 2 pawns up. Okay, there's a threat on the rook. He has to move the rook and he targets f6 again. It's protected by the king. Now rook c1 is played. So that introduces new threats and new ideas. Immediately queen c5, for example, try and exchange off queens. Queen e5. Actually the queen isn't taken off here, but in fact queen b4, which forks basically e7 and b7. Black could really resign here. He's 2 pawns down, and now he's 3 pawns down. He plays on a little bit. King h6, queen b3, rook g8. Now rook c5. So nasty pin, check, knight e7, and now queen f3. And the black king is becoming a central target here with h5 now. It's come out into the open on h6. So rook g6, check. It's all over really, by the shouting now. The knight moves. Bishop comes back to a very comfortable spot on b3, which protects the pawn and means this diagonal is very dangerous. So king h8, rook c8 pinning the knight, and you know he's going to coordinate a team effort now on g8 very shortly. So e7, would get that bishop b3 in and a winning king and pawn ending. Black takes on e7, takes, and here black resign. He realises, well, it's completely lost anyway. Bishop b3, tie the rook down, then a4 or anything just taking on g8 is winning. It's just a completely winning king and pawn ending with the a pawn just able to queen very easily, for example. So it was an interesting game, but from an evolution of style perspective, we see here a dynamic treatment of how to exploit an isolated queen's pawn by actually unisolating it. So first, it is restrained with the template method, you know, Nimzo-Indian, restrain, blockade, destroy. But the destroy part is interesting, it's clever, it's resourceful, that to actually destroy the restrained target, we're actually unisolating the pawn. So knight d4, and this is sort of Karpovian as well. I've definitely seen Karpov beat Kasparov in one of their World Championship matches with this knight e6, and then sort of targeting e6 and d5 later, because they come really practical weaknesses to exploit. You know, when black's without that light square bishop, the light square pawns are more vulnerable. So here bishop e2, preparing this blast through the centre. I wonder actually if f5 could be prevented with black playing f5. Let's just check that one as well here, actually, just out of interest. Okay, knight d5 actually works here because the e5 knight is vulnerable. So rook d, we've got no resource here, I think, because check, we've just won the piece back. So that's finally an advantage, the knight d5 idea. So black didn't dare to play f5 there. So that's why, you know, partly I think he moved his king. But f4, f5 is quite a knockout blow for the pawn chain. Pawn chain's getting lost in the centre, and it leads to the first clear advantage, a clear pawn up. Okay, so now there's a little bit of complacency which may have struck. There was an accurate move missed. So Alexander Alekhine not playing with, you know, engine accuracy, but rook d5 will be a beautiful shift to h7, even inviting the check. Maybe, you know, he didn't want to invite checks, the human thing not to allow checks, but the queen on e1 is decentralized, and with rook h5 white could exert, you know, serious threats like queen f5, you know, to get to h7. So but anyway, queen f2, this starts, you know, winning pawn after pawn, 2 pawns up, and he's going to be 3 pawns up the way he's playing it. So 3 pawns up, just remaneuvers his bishop soon to b3 to that key diagonal. So an easily winning king and pawn ending. So I hope you enjoyed that, and something about isolated queen's pawns in there. I want to touch on aesthetics in upcoming videos, because I've been reading also a book by Alexander Kotov saying, you know, Alekhine's style was quite beautiful in a way. He was an artist, a creative artist, often sacrificing pawns in the opening, creating these nice dynamic positions, and an attractive, you know, attacking creative style. And I think the style evolution, we are attracted generally to aesthetics and an aesthetic playing style, and I think that drives evolution. You see that in other things like cars. They get from A to B, but in the evolution of cars, they're getting more beautiful, they're getting curves, they're getting nice colours, they're getting nice designs. You know, so it's beauty in chess style, I think, is also an important thing. But I guess in this modern engineer, we're into precision engineering moves and very dynamic, you know, openings as well. But beauty, I think, is a very important driver of how players influence style. And Alexander's games not only, I think, are beautiful from the point of view of attacking creative games, but for me personally, there's an internal beauty that I think he was the first world champion with a really universal style of striking a beautiful balance between strategy and tactics. You know, often, you know, accumulating advantages positionally, and then a nice tactical combination to finish it off. So that nice combination is also, in a way, aesthetically nice in his games. Anyway, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.